we're with George Sutton now, and what are your recollections of World War Two?
Well, I've got a book full of them, really. But I was 8 years old when war was declared. It wasn't much of a surprise because there'd been nothing else but talk about war for about 18 months. My grandfather, in his wisdom, decided to move us out of Tilbury, which was, of course, all the docks of London and so on, down into what he considered was the safety of Kent. We lived in a market town called Faversham. Very good. Return to school was delayed because the air raid shelters for us pupils had been delayed. And when I did get back to school, which was like the end of October, I found I was slotted into a class with all the boys that had been evacuated from Chatham. I suppose they thought, oh, well, he's a London boy, bung him in there, like you see. That was fine. Well, progress went on and we had numerous air raids. My old grandfather had given us some shelter down in the cellar, which it was cold and damp, but never mind. Things progressed, and then, of course, as we all know, April, the big onslaught came with the Germans occupying the Low Countries and so on and so forth, and the big retreat. And then we had Dunkirk. Well, I remember one day, it was where Faversham is. It's a junction where the railway lines come up from Dover and from Ramsgate en route up to London. So the trains were bringing survivors from, soldiers from the Dunkirk. And my friend Morris and I climbed up on this wall by the railway station, seeing all these trains full of these poor soldiers and people rushing backwards and forwards with cups of tea and sandwiches and cakes, God knows what. Anyway, after that we got down and we said, what's happening now? And then the buzz got round, they were building a gun emplacement down the creek, which was out the back of our houses, you see. So off we went down there and was helping the soldiers fill sandbags. That was fine. That was our one start to our war effort. Being in a rural area such as that, when the later part of the summer and the autumn come, it was traditional for people to migrate out to the orchards and to the fields and so on. Well, Battle of Britain was starting then, and it was overhead. So, I'm sorry, Grandad, the idea of safety for us got kicked into the long grass. I agree with many people of my age that us boys, we weren't frightened. I think a lot of the time we were excited by it all. And anyway, hop picking was a tradition, of course, and children were encouraged to get out in the hop gardens, to earn a few pennies towards your uniform for the winter. And I went out there with our neighbour, Mrs. Moore, and I was getting away there, picking away, so on, and fine, but it became very hazardous because the air fights were going on over us. And I remember there was a cornfield near where we were picking, and this plane came down and been shot down. And I don't know really whether it was a German or one of ours, but the corn caught fire. So it was pretty horrific. And old Ma Moore said to my mother, look, I'm not taking him out there anymore, it's too dangerous, which was fair enough, So anyway, it progressed on. We was numerous air raids, and towards the end of October 1940 by then, I remember we were in the cellar, and there was this tremendous explosion. And what had happened was, it was all debatable exactly what sort of a bomb it was, but it was obviously aimed for the railway junction, which was quite a target. But unfortunately, fortunately it missed the railway station, but unfortunately it direct hit on a house with a family called Mr. and Mrs. Woods and so on. And of course there was a lot of devastation. The glass was blown out of all the windows in the shops, which was not direct, but the blast went everywhere. Us being in the cellar, my granddad had, it's the coal hole, where there was a hole where the coal came down. He rigged up a sheet of metal there. And after this explosion, we could hear all this glass tinkling again. Anyway, it was the top windows of our house were blown in, or out in this case. And there was a little job I had a bit later on of picking glass out of the coal, but that was another story. Progress it went on, and eventually, with the bombing was so bad, we were allocated one of the Morrison shelters, a great big metal thing, with perhaps some of you remember it. It was 6'6" by 4'6", and that was the table. And my aunt had her house badly damaged. She lived in Dagenham, and she brought her two girls down, my cousins, and we were all living there. And my aunt was a bit of a comedian, really, She couldn't tell a tale by just sitting there telling you. It had to be with demonstrations. My cousin Shirley, who was a couple of years younger than me, she was great. She was a dancer and a singer. And we used to pull the cloth back off the table, and we'd bit up there, and she taught me how to tap dance up there on this metal table. And I remember as kids, we sat along this sofa, the three of us, my gran and my granddad positioned, and my mother, when she was home, and my aunt, and there was a neighbour that would come in. Hello, Nay, she said, it's only me. Because people used to come and drop me. She said, I thought I'd come home, get away from my lot. She had 11 kids, did Mrs. Cox. Their eldest was a prisoner of war at the time, but it did thin it down a bit. And it was fun. And us kids would sit there listening to all their tales. And we'd been in hysterics, especially if my gran was a bit Mutt and Jeff, you see. And she'd mishear. And of course, she'd, no, it's not like... And of course, us kids used to laugh all the more, didn't we? And anyway, it progressed on. With school, because of the bombing, we only went half day 1 year in the mornings. I was in Mr. Curlin's class then. And... in the afternoons in Mr. Rayner's class. And but our education, really, when I look back on it, was brilliant. Very often, if we were there at school, the siren would go and it was up books, straight across the road. Don't laugh, but fancy putting air raid shelters for kids in an orchard, but nevertheless that's where it was. And we'd sit there in these tunnels, more or less knees touching. I used to think I was going to get a permanent crick in my neck looking up the tunnel. But the teachers were, I think about it, they were brilliant. Very often, if we didn't have the time for books or anything like that, they'd teach us off the cuff. History, geography, and they used to make it sound so interesting while all this lot was going on overhead. And I remember one day in particular, it seemed to be, as soon as the all clear went, the siren would go again. And one day, we'd got into the shelters, and it must have been about 8:45 in the morning, because I was mourning that week. And we were there, and the sirens kept going, the guns were going, and God knows what. We weren't getting bombed too much, but of course the planes were going backwards and forwards. And we were there all day, and we were there until about 7 o'clock, I think it was, that night. Some kindly people brought us some sandwiches down there at some time during the raids, and us kids were scoffing these. I also remember we were scoffing some of the apples at one stage. There were a few belly aches that week, you know. But and it progressed on, and we soldiered on, and we had the flying bombs then, you know, once the other air raids finished.
They were doodle bugs, weren't they, the flying
The
bugs?
doodle bugs, yes. But I think we got a bit blasé about it all. Oh, another air raid sort of thing. And you were conditioned. Right, if we're going to get bombed, we're going to get bombed. End of story. And people carried on. My granddad had an allotment and a very nice shed he'd built because he was a master shipwright, by the way, but that's beside the point. Across the road, there was agriculture, and I think it was potatoes out there they were picking up. And my old granddad, apparently, this particular day, it must have been about 1943, I think, round about there. He was there with his pipe sitting outside of his shed. And this plane came over and dropped a bomb, and there was all these people there who'd been loading spuds onto this horse and cart, and they all heard this plane and flattened themselves out, and the bomb fell, I think, just forward to the horse, and he bolted, and the window in the shed went, and my granddad was sitting there, and his pipe, I don't know whether it fell out of his hand or whether it was blown out, but he said, "I lost my bloody pipe." But anyway, we carried on until 1945 came, and there was much rejoicing. Obviously, the war in Europe was over. And that night, you know, I was nearly 14, and I was down the pub with my mate having a light ale. And I wouldn't say that we had a bad war. We were very fortunate. My great aunt was killed in the Blitz up in London, and but we managed ourselves. Where rationing was concerned, and so many people talk about rationing, it was sparse, but it was good. And I think, of course, in those days, I mean, my gran was a whiz cook. I don't know how she managed it, but we weren't hungry with the vegetables and soft fruits that my grandfather grew and all the rest of it. And people bartered eggs with something else and so on like that. And I don't ever recall being hungry. I do recall being without toothpaste once. My gran said, "It's all right, use salt."
Salt and water, wasn't it?
Salt, yeah, salt. And it was good. But I all that time as well, I was in a church choir. And our choir master was a brilliant man, actually. And he organised us boys into a choral society. And we'd back up concerts that were being held for War Weapons Week, Warship Week, Red Cross Week, or something or other like that. And we were called the Silver Songsters. Laughable. And we wore white shirts, white shorts, socks, and gym shoes. Well, gym shoes became sparse, you know, so we was on stage in socks. But we used to sing, you know, in these concerts. And there was one lady there, rather a large lady she was, and she was a brilliant singer. Dorothy Jordan, her name was. And I remember this particular concert, she was all dressed up as Britannia. And as we were lined up for the finale, Britannia came out, and I always think she was marvellous. She never muffed a line, she never forgot a word. And I was more or less just to her right. And there it was, she was stood there on the stage with a trident, and there was the words of land and hope and glory all on the and I thought, oh, you old fraud. But that is the things that we did as children. We were very conscious of the war effort, and we used to do all sorts of things for it. You know, we used to collect and sell one another's comics. You know, I remember once we had some sort of a concert where we were all singing in somebody's shed out the back, and we raised about 8 and 4pence for the Red Cross and all sorts of silly things like that. But we felt that we were doing something. We had troops stationed outside the town, and prior to D-Day, I remember, they were exercising. Obviously, it was house to house, and our front door apparently flew open. They ran through the house, about 2 or 3 soldiers ran through, straight out the back, over the garden wall, and there was flashbangs and smoke bombs going off everywhere. We thought we'd been invaded for a moment, but you know, it was one of those things. I said, oh, well, that was another thing that we experienced. But you could go on forever.
Well,
you know, go on forever.
So insightful. Massive round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.